Can you hear me, Demetra? Trevor?
Yep. Can you hear me? Hi, good evening, everyone. Sorry, I'm not there in person. I fully intended to be and life got in the way. So sorry.
Okay, if we get one more person, we'll have a quorum. If we don't, we'll all come to your house. So, well, welcome everybody. And to those of you joining us online, we are still gathering here. But I want to, first of all, introduce our new commissioner, Melissa Ben, who's just appointed this week. And I'll give Melissa a chance to introduce herself. And I also want for everyone who, for anyone who doesn't know that Demetra might not be here. I can't even say the words about how she's leaving, so I won't. But I wanted to bring an offering to celebrate in case you're, but hopefully you'll be here in November. So I will pass candy around. Happy Halloween. So let's go around. So welcome everyone. Being recorded. This is the C2E2 meeting for October. And we will start by going around the room with the introduction. And Demetra, let's start with you.
Demetra McBride, Bureau Chief with the Office of Sustainability and Environmental Management. Hi, Melissa Ben, appointed as of Friday and read everything on Sunday, so excited.
I emailed Melissa and she's like, I'm in a coffee house right after we start reading everything. Melissa, can you just?
Oh, I'm sorry, yes.
Everyone else could just say their name, but you get to actually tell us a little bit about
Nice.
that good stuff.
Yeah, I started my career in sustainable agriculture development in East and Africa for a good decade and then transitioned with an MBA into the private sector. I now work at a small startup. We help climate tech companies apply for grants and contracts using AI to make it more efficient. Joined because I know that local government is where things get done and I wanted to be part of it. And so I'm excited to be here.
Great, well, welcome. We're excited to have you. Doug.
I'm Doug Snowinboss. I'm a commissioner and chair of the Energy Committee.
Hi, Rob Sandola, Commissioner.
Elizabeth Whitney, Commissioner and Vice Chair of the Energy Committee.
John McIntyre, Commissioner and Vice Chair.
Jennifer, you ready on this?
Cindy Lewin, Chair of C2E2.
Jenna Peabody, Air Team.
Alice Hageman, I'm presenting on the Barkoff Departments project at Gyre Lynch Real Estate Partners.
So Trevor, you're doing C2E2.
Yeah, Trevor Montano, commissioner that has missed the food in the in-person meeting twice in a row now. So I will try not to do that next time.
Okay, and Vicki, I think you all met, but go ahead.
I'm Vicki Kieschel. I support, I'm an architect with the Cadmus Group, and I support Demetra and her team at AIR in the county.
Great. And Melissa, so I'm just calling on everybody who I can see online. So Melissa.
Yeah, thanks. I'm Melissa Danowski. I'm with the county's housing division, and I'm here for the Barcroft project. I'm the general county coordinator for Barcroft.
Wonderful. Then Wendell. Wendell, we'll come back to you while you figure out how to get off mute. Jamie, can you let us just say hi and introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, my name is Jamie Kern. I'm an Arlington resident. I work in clean energy and climate policy. I listened into one of these meetings a while back, and I'm interested in applying to be on the group. So curious to learn more if that's okay to sit in and listen.
Great. And John Bloom, a veteran of this group.
Yeah, hi. John Bloom, former C2E2 and current Energy Committee. Keep up with you guys as best as I can. Thanks.
John and Forrest Schwarzenbach. Okay, thank you, Wendell. All right. Okay, does anybody from the public have a public comment? We didn't hear from any of you that you did in the introduction. Okay, so assuming not, and wanting to get right into the substance, I'd love to turn it over to Alice, and thank you very much for being here in person. And Jair Lynch has done a lot of great development all over this metro area, so over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for having me today. I'm happy to be here to present a project that's near and dear to my heart. I grew up in Arlington. I've now live on the other side of the Beltway, but I love Arlington. I love the area, and I do love this project as well. So really happy to be here presenting on it. Next slide, please, Jenna. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Jair Lynch Real Estate Partners, a little bit about the Barcroft project as a whole, and then getting into some of the important aspects of it, our biophilic design that we've really emphasized, some general sustainability and resiliency that we've incorporated, and then the green building measures that we're following through on. So Jair Lynch, a lot of these are sort of our corporate introduction, but I'll spare you a lot of the details. But we typically do like more of an urban infill project, as you might imagine. Although we do have properties all over the East Coast, really, DC metro region, but then as far south as Atlanta now. And truly we create extraordinary places. That's very important to us. And I don't know. It's just as I mentioned, this Barcroft is a passion project. We're people that care about what we're doing, and it's not just making a buck. It's making a beautiful place. I remember when I was applying to Jair Lynch, something on the website talked about the soul of a place, and that really still resonates with me to this day. Is that these whether they're apartment buildings or the entire neighborhood of Barcroft apartments, these places have souls in and of themselves, and it's very special to me. The next slide, please. Yeah, simple reason. So we strive to make places that are extraordinary. Sorry, that's our company motto. History, I'm forgetting I have it right in front of me here. Sorry. Thank you. I can do that. So we're about a 25-year-old company now. A lot of tenured senior management and a lot of diversity, over 60% women and diverse individuals. CBE being based in Washington, D.C. We have a big ESG focus. I'm sure I don't need to tell all of you in this room what ESG is or talk through any of that, but we do have an ESG committee to make sure that we're holding true to those principles and that they're kind of the foundation of the projects that we're creating. Which brings us to Barcroft Apartments. 60 acres, over 60 acre site. Over 60 acre site. We are going to be, in total, it's about a $2 billion development, 3 million square feet, and it's going to be over 10 years, 10 plus phases. Oops, I'm sorry, I went too far. Here it is. So, back in December 2021, Jair Lynch acquired the site in a partnership with Arlington County and the Amazon Housing Equity Fund. Our commitment was to preserve and expand attainable housing. And for us, that attainable housing is 30% to 120% AMI. With our support from Arlington County and the Amazon Housing Equity Fund came a commitment to 99 years of affordability, which is really groundbreaking for this kind of realm, is keeping 1,300 units affordable for 99 years. Typically you see, 30, 40 years, sometimes 50 or 60, but the 99-year mark is really a new one. So in the broader scope of the project, we are going to be renovating about 900 of the existing 1,300 units. That's my personal focus within the project is making sure the renovations go smoothly. We are including a new resident amenity center. We're also going to be building about 400 units of new LIHTC housing, so affordable housing, to make up that full 1,335 units. In addition, to help kind of bring equity into the project, we are doing new mixed-use development along the Columbia Pike corridor in line with the form-based code that Arlington has established for that area. Any questions on Barcroft before we get into sort of the green aspects of it, of the project?
I just wanted to mention, which pretty obvious from what you see that this is just a very, very large and important project for Arlington. And that is why we asked Alice to come in and speak. And it's a real opportunity, the showcase, which hopefully you're back to show us that it's going to be. Show us that this can be done sustainably and affordably.
And Alice, really quick,
What?
if I remember correctly, when we partnered with Dryer Lynch on the NREL
Yes.
technical project, did I remember correctly that the ownership of the power, the electrical grid, is actually with Dryer Lynch, with the community?
Yes,
within the
currently it is.
perimeter?
It
Okay.
is currently a microgrid. We are moving to Dominion meters. It gives, we're individually metering to give residents the autonomy over their consumption. It kind of holds residents accountable, gives them the opportunity it empowers them to
So you're
minimize their
turning
costs.
over the infrastructure.
Correct,
to-
yeah, we're
to make
replacing
it-
the existing microgrid, private microgrid was not sustainable for all the electrification that we're doing as part of the project. We are decarbonizing a lot, but that means increasing a lot of our electrical load. The existing microgrid was not going to be able to support that, hence the need to replace it, and the weighing the pros and cons, we went with the public system, of
Thank you.
course.
And one quick question, you use the term attainable housing and affordable housing on this slide, and you have an AMI kind of range from 30 to 120. I mean, is there a difference in your definition between kind of affordable and attainable? And second is, I mean, I assume the LIHTC is all affordable as it has to be. So I guess, how are you using those definitions here in this context?
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry, LIHTC, low income housing tax credits.
Okay.
Sorry, we say it LIHTC so often. I should. Yeah, exactly. Sorry, LIHTC. So yes, you're absolutely right. There is a difference between affordable and attainable. The attainable includes up to that 120% AMI. Oftentimes those upper echelons are not necessarily regulated. It's more like a naturally occurring, but the rents are in line with what you'd expect for 120% AMI. Affordable, is typically around 60% AMI. We're using income averaging for this project to be able to include some of the residents that are currently on site that make up to 80% AMI. We're trying to expand our reach a little bit more and make the deal work. But yes, there is a difference. Oh, sorry, the attainable housing mainly will relate to some of the new development we're doing along Columbia Pike. That's meant to not just be it's meant to be attainable as opposed to affordable or market rate. That answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we've always operated under the assumption that affordable is 60% AMI or lower. And so I don't know what the LIHTC threshold is, but I mean, this goes a fair bit higher than that. Do you know what the breakout is between kind of affordable and attainable? Like, I'm just curious as to how much of this is going to.
All of the 1,335 units are going to be that affordable range. So the additional units that we're building beyond the 1,335 are where we're going to get into the attainable, the 60 to 120% AMI. And I know I confuse matters. So all new residents to Barcroft will need to be at that 60% AMI or below. The few folks that fall into that 80% to 60% are going to be residents that currently reside at Barcroft. We have a commitment to not displace anyone. So we figured out a way to be able to move those folks back into renovated units. Unlike the folks that are over 80% AMI are going to be able to move to unrenovated units and eventually to the new development kind of market rate attainable housing. So we're working through a lot of parameters to be able to accommodate as many residents as possible, staying to our commitment to not displace anyone.
Right. I will let you get on to sustainability.
Okay, I was going to say, yeah, I'm sure Melissa can contribute on the affordable thresholds, but I will go to sustainability if that. Okay. Starting with biophilic design, near and dear to my heart. I know they all are. So one of the most beautiful parts of Barcroft is our tree canopy. It's really, really spectacular and naturally occurring. The site's 80 years old and these trees show it. They're just really, really spectacular. So we'll see it on a future slide, but we do have these areas of natural preserve that we are keeping just nearly forested. We're not touching them. and they are forested, heavily forested currently. In the conservation areas, which refer to the areas around the apartment buildings that we are renovating and not redeveloping, we're maintaining as much of the tree canopy as possible. So it's, honestly, it's for the best for everyone to keep these large scale trees in place. And that's our goal, is to preserve as many as possible. You can see here in the MFTP, which is, I'll get back to that in a second. MFTP, we set tree canopy thresholds or targets for the project, varying based on the natural preserve areas that I mentioned that are going to remain these forested areas, the conservation areas where the renovations are happening, public parks we'll talk to in a minute. There's a few mini parks throughout the site, and then the new development area. Obviously the hardest place to maintain tree canopy or create tree canopy, but we're still focused on that there as well. MFTP, sorry. So for those that aren't familiar, Barcroft went through, or is still going through, but approval process, which we'll refer to a lot as MFDP, the Master Finance and Development Plan. This has been approved by the county board several times, but this is part of our agreement with Arlington. Sort of one of the conditions of our partnership is us, preparing, working with Arlington to set these guidelines for the project. And that's the MFDP that I'm referring to. All of these commitments here that I'm presenting to you today are outlined in the MFTP and committed to there. I need to do anything. Sorry, go ahead. Yes, please. Thank you. Mini parks. As I mentioned, we are going to be including 1.3 acres of public mini parks in a couple areas on site. And then another biophilic commitment we're making is the pedestrian. So you can see here these green kind of fuzzy lines are representing the site, many of which are lovely tree streets or sidewalks already. You can see this one starts the side of one of our preserve areas that I was mentioning. This is part of that 2 acres of preserve. It is dark green here. The mini parks you can see down here as well. Here's 1 and 2. Lost my third one. Sorry, guys. They're mini. Yeah, 1.3 acres total. Oh, I know. Third one's up here across the street. There's a third mini park. And what I think one of the spectacular parts of the Barcroft site is its adjacency to some other amazing parks. As I mentioned, I was an Arlington resident. I lived just right up here for 4 or 5 years, and the being right along the 4 Mile Run Path, Doctors Run Park. I mean, I used to walk these areas all the time myself. It really is just so nice to be adjacent to such wonderful places, and the Barcroft site itself with the large tree canopy and the parks and preserve areas really just it all connects very well, very naturally. Private courtyards, one of the unique parts of well, it's not unique to Barcroft, but the beauty, I didn't thank you. Sorry. Is that okay? Yeah. Private courtyard. One of the beautiful ways these buildings are formed in a true garden style apartment is a lot of times they create U shapes around courtyards, which just create a nice space for children to play, just families to gather, and we're really going to lean into that. So in these courtyards, they're typically just grassy lawns right now. Not only are we going to add trees, but also resident amenities and specialized landscaping to enhance the areas. And shared open space. This will be for our new development, LIHTC, so the affordable new development, about 400 units total we talked about. At least one of those buildings will include a resident amenity center for both the renovated units and the new affordable units, and it will include a courtyard of some sort. Admittedly, not fully designed yet, but that will be a prerequisite for us. Any questions on biophilic design before we move on to sustainability and resiliency?
Native plants, phases.
All of that, yep. Absolutely. Yeah, Micah is our civil engineer, but also our landscaping team. I know they worked with the county a lot, and they're and it's great, they're the whole site, so they're really knowing and owning every component of it, working closely with us to make sure everything as it should be. Sustainability and resiliency. So one of the areas of the site as it exists is really lacking is stormwater management. As you can see, the reason I included this picture is you can see there's a little bit of erosion here on the front. The gutters are just not great. It's not the natural terrain is not working well, and with climate change, we're getting a lot more rainwater than we used to. So we are making a big push as part of our renovations to really enhance the stormwater management, new gutters, and into storm drains, all within code. I know there's a lot of things to be mindful of as we're designing those systems. So, but stormwater management is certainly a big push. New construction buildings, of course, will meet or exceed current stormwater management practices as well, which will include, bioretention as part of our standard design these days. Additionally, Doctors Run, as I mentioned, one of those parks that we're adjacent to, Doctors Run. We're going to continue to study that. We're working with the county staff to look for opportunities to, you're right, looking to improve restoration and the stormwater management to help keep the residents around that area safe. Reduce carbon footprint. This one is, quite simple, but very important to me. By renovating these units instead of knocking them down and rebuilding, we are, reducing our carbon footprint of the project as a whole. Yeah, I would renovate all day long if that's if we could, and I'm very proud to be a part of that. Oh, thank you so much.
And Alice, don't you have some historic preservation?
Yes, so we are working with Virginia's Department of Historic Resources to get historic tax credits, which only helps our deals to pencil and be sustainable financially. But yeah, that is a big part of it. We've been working with the Arlington, oh gosh, I'm going to forget, Lauren Ferris at Historic Preservation, excuse me, and her team to make sure we're doing right by these buildings, which is very important to us. Which frankly means doing not a lot to them in the best possible way. But we are, to my next point, still doing green building measures. So right now, there's a lot of gas and carbon usage in these buildings. They're all currently heated by large central boilers, centralized hot water heaters. And we're removing all gas sources at the renovation area. So we're going completely electric. Ranges, obviously ranges and all of our typical appliances. We did a study with NREL. We are decarbonizing. We're reducing our energy consumption, our carbon by about 13%, which is not as astronomical as I'd like it to be, but it is. That's because we're adding laundry. We're balancing the additions for residents. Exhaust fans, things that are modernizing the space, but also removing all of the carbon impact from all those gas systems. Thank you. Sorry. So as I mentioned before, we are under the Neighborhood Form-Based Code for the Columbia Pike area, and we are following the requirements, which is to do a LEED certification, Earthcraft certification, or equivalent. Yes.
Alice, I just want to go back because it sounds like it's super important, and I hate for you to just gloss over it. But what I thought I heard you say was that it's going to be completely electric. So the stoves and ranges are all going to be electric. The hot water heating is all going to be electric. And the HVAC is all going to be electric for all of these.
Correct.
Okay, great. Wanted to
Backup generator.
No backup generator. No. Yeah. Great. Yeah, we are certainly balancing, resident needs versus sustainability and affordability. There's it's a balancing act for sure, but I think we've done a good job of managing all of that.
What are you looking for in terms of the hot water heat? Are you going with heat pump unit, heat pump?
Yes, yeah, sorry. We're doing ducted ducted split systems throughout. And that's, we also have, not only do we have, Arlington as our partner and just general we have Virginia housing requirements. So Virginia housing, which is the tax credit syndicator, is another set of requirements, which is why we were limited in terms of what we can do for heating and cooling. But yes, ducted split systems for the HVAC.
But how about the hot water? Is
Oh, a hot water is a, oh my goodness.
doing in unit or centralized?
It is in unit, excuse me, it's in unit. I think it's heat pump.
You doing heat pump? hot
Yeah.
water?
I don't want to overpromise on that. So just bear, don't commit me to that. I'm sorry for not knowing off the top of my head.
More global question, but if you weren't doing tax credit housing with their sustainability requirements, would Ireland have a reason to and be doing? I'm trying to figure out. It's great that you are doing this as but why you and nobody else? I'm trying to answer because it's not nobody else.
It's form-based code is really the requirement that's driving that's correct. Yep. Yeah. The neighborhood's form-based code for
Elizabeth
Columbia
is our expert on it.
Heights.
Don't worry, no quiz.
And obviously, I will say though, I can't speak to Arlington specifically, but I will say like in DC, a lot of construction in DC, the green code is as stringent as you'll see for a lot of the LEED certification and requirements. That's my experience.
Right.
So
we see all the developers doing in DC and Maryland what we want them to do. They don't.
Yeah.
Is that an accurate summary?
Because we've just gone into this with form-based code purview, I can't speak to what, we knew going into it, we were gonna do our green certification. So I can't say for sure what's required by code or not. A lot of times you might not have the like LEED stamp on the project, but you're doing a lot of the measures, the best practices really to still achieve that. So I can't speak to that, but I will say just because it doesn't have a stamp doesn't mean it's not kind of modernized in its sustainability efforts, green building.
What are you looking to in terms of improving just the insulation and the building envelope?
Absolutely. So the biggest thing, some of the windows have been recently replaced by the previous ownership before we purchased the property, but a lot of them are very old single pane steel windows, and we're going to be replacing those. Any new windows that we're putting in are going to be aluminum, but have code compliant U values. Not even, I think we're doing a little bit above. I know we're doing a little bit above. I don't want to misquote the U value, but sustainable windows. We aren't doing a lot of insulation in the building envelope where we're not already opening up the wall because of historic factors. They don't want you taking out something that's part of the historic fabric of the building. Obviously, the masonry is in really good shape, so we're not going to be tearing that apart to blow in insulation. But anywhere basements are exposed, anywhere walls are coming down or being exposed, we're going back up to R38. Oh wait, R19, excuse me, on the walls. R38 or 39 is our attic insulation. So we are doing all new insulation in our attics as well.
Yeah.
Great. Any other questions on this slide? Oh, actually, well, some of our measures. So I know I've talked to some of these already. Low-hanging fruit, converting to LED lighting throughout. We talked about the mini splits instead of the centralized gas-powered boilers, Energy Star appliances, sub-metering the utilities, Misha, to your point. Lots of pros and cons there, but for us, it was a big part of it was increasing, resident accountability on their usage. If the landlord's paying for it, you're not going to be as conscious about turning off the lights, right? New water sense plumbing fixtures, as well as for our green building, For new construction as well, we are, it's even easier to achieve these sustainability measures with construction, following the same neighborhood form-based code requirements, so LEED Gold, Earthcraft Gold or equivalent, and all Energy Star certifications as well.
Have you looked at, especially for the new construction, the FIAS certification? Because that would be a higher standard than what the form-based code is.
Sorry, what was the
FIAS,
Yes.
Passive House Institute.
Oh, yes. Not yet. I think we're not far enough down the road yet. Not yet is the short answer.
I mean, that would really push the envelope.
I will absolutely pass that
Honestly,
along. Yeah.
when we talked about the update to the form-based code, we weren't happy with it because we didn't think it really met the requirements of, really getting to decarbonization of buildings.
Yeah,
So, and you're going beyond what's in the form-based code on a lot of it, because electrification isn't like required
right.
and
Yeah.
things like that, so.
Yeah, no, I will say I don't think we've gotten far enough down the road on design for the new construction to have that set, but
But sometimes it helps to start with that,
absolutely, yeah, we will.
include that as you're getting, because otherwise you get too far along in the design, you've lost opportunities.
Absolutely. Like, actually going back to the renovations, because that's, as I mentioned before, that's my purview here. For example, we wanted to put solar in, because a lot of times that'll pay for itself, right? But the tree canopy is so robust that we couldn't get solar in. It's so ironic that it's like, working against itself. But new construction is a perfect example where but that's another one that's almost become a default these days, is putting solar on top of new construction. Not just in the city, but I think in the suburbs as well.
Speaking of where you are in the process, have you guys started the SPRC process? You know what that is? It's
I was like, I'm going to call to Melissa. I don't know.
I don't think they have to if they're going through the form-based code.
Okay, so that's
Oh, the site plan. Yes, I did learn. Yes, no, we do not have to because of the form-based code. Sorry, all the acronyms get me.
Yeah. Very understandable. That is.
And
In terms of public engagement, and this question is going perhaps more to our, so what is the public, if there is the formal SPRC process, is there a engagement turning to all staff in the room? You can say no or whatever. I was just curious. And I know I don't want to take up too much of our speaker's time, which.
I'm gonna punt to Melissa because I know internally we're doing a lot of, exhaustive engagement across all the different departments. But Melissa, are you?
yeah, we advisory working groups. Melissa's going to be better.
Yeah. Oh, so sorry, I can jump in. I'm Melissa Danowski with the Housing Division. And about public engagement, really the public engagement started upon acquisition of the apartment complex by J.R. Lynch. So there was a resident first engagement process, which meant that J.R. Lynch first started off, building trust with the residents, holding events, holding meetings. There were a number of town halls for the residents, during the process. And then during the visioning process, the master financing and development plan, there were also meetings with the residents and what was called an expanded form-based code advisory working group. So that included not only the usual members of the form-based code working group, advisory working group, but also included other stakeholders, affordable housing advocates, and residents themselves on that working group when the master financing and development plan, or really the vision for the property, was being formed. So there really has been a robust engagement process, and I'll say now, as we move into the next phase of actual implementation of some of the code changes, and as they get into perhaps even their new construction use permit, all the regular form-based code public processes still apply, which
Great.
does include that form-based code advisory working group.
Thank you, Melissa. That's very helpful. And of course, you're here, which is a form of.
I apologize. I thought you meant like sustainability focused public engagement. I was like, I'm not sure, but yes, sorry. Lots of working group. Yes, absolutely. This is really our last slide. It's just talking to.
We also just had a quick question from John.
yeah.
Will new construction be all?
The only exception would be if we do like a gas fireplace in a courtyard, but that's very rare. That it's a unique situation. Exactly. So while I can't say for certain, highly likely it will be all electric. We don't typically put gas in new construction these days. Yes, so some of the new construction measures, all sort of modern implementation of things that we're learning about, like bird-friendly materials. 5 years ago, I would have never thought that would be baseline, but this is our starting point for sustainability for our construction.
We're using bird-friendly materials all the way up and down.
I don't know. I don't think we've gotten that far, to be honest. So, yes.
We go back to the one, so saw something about EV charging infrastructure. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. Again, I apologize for not having concrete answers on these new constructions. We're early on in the construction, but typically we do a percentage of the resident units as EV charging with EV charging stations in the parking lot.
In the parking lot?
Mhm.
Okay.
Parking garage, yeah.
The garage, so are these
Sorry.
garages?
Yes, they'll have subterranean garages. Yeah. Right, currently all of Barcroft has surface parking. And that will all remain, but we'll be adding parking density. Oh, sorry, that's a fair point. In the development areas, yes, but in the renovation areas, the conservation areas, no, we won't be infilling. Excuse me, infilling.
Any other questions? Melissa's done an amazing job of staying on time.
Yeah, sorry to you. Comment. I didn't mean to talk over you. You're good. Okay. Well, I just want to say I love everything that I'm hearing from you. Really encouraging and hopefully a model for other developers to follow. I am curious about the new meters. Well, a couple questions. One, do you know what powered the previous microgrid?
One Dominion transformer, right at 4 Mile Run in South Thomas, connected to, it fed the entire microgrid. Is that what you meant?
Okay, so it's still their generation mix?
Dominion's generation mix?
Yes, Dominions. Yeah, sorry.
And
I will say there's one exception, section 9, which is like an area, the last built section up by Columbia Pike and George Mason is all individually metered currently.
so it didn't have on-site generation previously. Okay. With the new meters, what type of thermostats? Will they be smart meters? Will they have like cool new thermostats?
That is a great question. Typically we'll do like a programmable, a programmable thermostat will be pretty baseline these days. But I don't have probably nothing above and beyond in terms of smart, like learning technology. I can't say for sure that it would be like a Nest thermostat or like even but usually they're typically programmable, if not internet based.
Okay. I would definitely encourage thinking about smart meters, and maybe Dominion can help with this.
Okay.
Maybe that's standard for them now, but it really does help when eventually we do two-way electric flow, and we've got a lot of electric vehicles there.
Yeah.
It will be helpful for them. State of the art.
Absolutely. Yeah, we haven't, we're still working on getting things not kicked off with Dominion. We've been working on our design process with them, but we have not ordered meters per se. So I will make sure we're making that request.
Fantastic work. Thank you.
And actually kind of think, when you get to the solar on buildings, obviously you don't cut down trees. That's
Right. Well, and that's,
I understand. Yeah, but where you have opportunities and think of that as a microgrid and additional sustainability. But the other thing I would at least kind of encourage and is, if you stick to the form-based code, you're basically sticking to the minimum. If you're presenting it that way, and instead look at it from the perspective of, the passive house certifications or the international living future certifications. Those are really kind of top of the line, really is kind of thinking and present yourself as really being way out ahead.
Absolutely.
Of developments and now's the time to be thinking about that and building those ties and putting that into the development, because you go too far and you're not going to get there. But this has got such promise to be really a showcase for sustainability and decarbonization, and I would strongly encourage you to take advantage of that and start looking at potential now for really making this a great project.
Each all over it.
Yeah. Melissa and I can go on tour.
Well, Rob.
Sorry, just one more for the new construction that you're going to install solar on the roof. Are you doing storage in those facilities as well, so you can leave? I don't know, is it from a resilience perspective that other units within the development can go to that building?
Yeah, I would love that idea for the resiliency and sort of independence to be kind of off grid. We haven't gotten that far in our planning, our design of the new construction. I will certainly, we will talk about implementing that. Typically, we do sort of back to the grid system, but I do think a storage system would give us more flexibility and just to make it a more robust system. So that's a good thing. Thank you.
Okay, well, with that, let's thank Alice. Great job.
Thanks, Melissa.
Yes, thank you, Melissa.
Thank
All
you.
Well, with that, and then you're.
Oh, sorry, I just said thank you.
Yeah,
Hopefully
probably.
it's late.
All right, well, with that, I'd like to, so our next thing is the commercial market resiliency and the way it ties into the green building
Thank you so much.
incentive program and Demetra and
Mark
Mark
McCauley,
McCauley.
I'd like to introduce to those of you who don't know him.
boy, Mark, you timed that so well.
I know.
It's literally just,
Mark-
they're voting with it right now.
He was at the Transportation Commission.
Oh, wow.
So I was in the building. I wasn't very far.
Well, we're very glad to have you. Okay, so over to you guys.
I'm going to, Mark has a presentation, so I'm going to let him, because this is going to be the first flush of a lot of the information that you may or may not have heard before. So I'm going to let Mark take it away, and just to, let you know that AED, we've been working with AED through the CMRI, the new GBIP, for almost a year and a half, back and forth, and also the CPHP for,
Mark, is it easier for you to come down here or are you good down there?
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. As long as people can hear me on the mic, that's fine. Thank you. Yeah, so thank you very much. Mark McCauley with Arlington Economic Development. I'm the co-lead of the Commercial Market Resiliency Initiative, which is an initiative by the county manager to deal with the changing office and economic climate in the county. Joined with me is Jane Kim, who also works in Arlington Economic Development, and Jill Hunger, who is with CPHD and is a co-lead on both CMRI and this process. So this process is about a policy and some ordinance changes to start to implement a policy that looks at the broader question of how is the county going to react to this challenging office market, in particular, the growing supply of obsolete office buildings, and obsolete as defined by they exist, they're not full, and not only are they not full, they're very difficult to release, they're not competitive, and they'll be chronically vacant. So next slide. So what does this process change? And I do want to say that while this is the first time we're in front of here, there'll be plenty of work done on this over the next year for the broader policy, but we are going to November with the county board policy and an ordinance for adaptive reuse, which we'll spend a lot of time talking about. Green building is certainly an important part of this, but just so you understand, this is a broader initiative by the manager. And so we've hit just about every commission this fall. This might actually last one. And we are being asked to go very quickly. The board is asked to go very quickly, and the board has also said, let's try it out, let's get it done, and then let's figure out over next year if we need to make tweaks to it. So the county-wide policy looks at all tools relative to potentially repurposing or removing obsolete office space, which can be included adaptive reuse, which is a first focus or a first step, and we'll talk a lot about that because that's the one we're looking at implementing first. But very soon after, we'll be studying ways to look at repositioning, which is investment in office buildings without changing the use to make them more competitive. And then various types of redevelopment that we're all aware of. The challenge of our current processes are redevelopment is taking on a bit of a spectrum from full-scale redevelopment that we're familiar with, where someone raises a building, goes down to ground, goes into the ground, builds underground parking, then builds up new, to other types of redevelopment, including what we're calling partial redevelopment, which is where someone may raise all the way down to a podium or first level garage and then build a new, but is keeping that base structure, or adaptive reuse plus concept, which is keeping the same building except adding stores on top, which we've seen once in the county in the past 15 years, generally 220 20th in Crystal City is a process like that.
So the policy, again, just so you, because it may get a little confusing, please interrupt me if it does, is meant to sort of look at all these tools. What we'll talk a lot about tonight is adaptive reuse, which is just one of those tools, which is often called conversions in other communities, where you're looking at the change in use as the primary function of the entitlement. Because that's our first focus, we are quickly moving alongside to this November action on the policy to a zoning ordinance amendment, which sets up this new process, including setting up criteria and limitations, looking at affordable housing and methods for achieving minimal amounts of density to improve the building. Once again, not adding to the building significantly, but to really improving the building. And then ongoing behind the scenes, but certainly a key piece of the fabric, including relative to questions of rebuilding, is what are the administrative regulations that are going to guide the review of these submittals? What do developers or owners have to submit to be approved as an application? What is the process and timing? And then what are the standards and or conditions that are going to be applied when review before it gets to the county? Next slide. So again, the overarching policy statement is that a bold public policy and regulatory intervention is required to meet this challenge, to address the significantly adverse impacts economically on the commercial markets themselves, but more importantly to the county, the fiscal impacts, the revenue impacts, and the placemaking impacts, because as we say, vacant buildings don't make for good neighbors, particularly when they're chronically vacant. They make for horrible neighbors, and they impact buildings around them. And even healthy buildings kind of are left sort of affected by those. So one of the things that this policy will do is establish as a public priority the removal or repurposing of obsolete office space. What this means is in the zoning ordinance, this comes from the state statutes that goes into our zoning ordinance that says the board can modify certain things. The way they modify it is by referencing it as a public priority. So in the zoning ordinance sections, there's essentially sustainable building, affordable housing, civic facilities, and other public priorities, which is a catch-all. This will add specifically removal of obsolete office buildings as a priority. And that allows the board to consider modifications and consider trade-offs about achieving that priority. And it's really where the board, I think, establishes that this is a near-term, very much near-term challenge, a long-term challenge, and a structural challenge that needs to be addressed. And we did a lot of talk in various presentations about the why, and I'm sorry, happy to talk about it, but in the limited amount of time, I didn't want to take up too much of your time, but there's a significant justification for why not dealing with a commercial market affects all of us, including our budgets year over year, to fund all the services that make Arlington a great place. And so this policy will focus on that element, transforming the supply of existing obsolete hospitals. Next slide. Yeah.
About county policy for approving new office. Because I've seen some come on board and be empty immediately.
Well, there is no, so two things. One is that we do reference in the policy our continued support for new office inventory where appropriate. We've only had 2 office buildings built outside of Amazon. 2 office buildings built in the past 10 years. I think
one next to.
What's that? That's one of the 2.
That.
Yes. Is that a question?
Well, I was saying, how do we prevent that from happening? New office buildings that are empty.
Well, new office buildings play an important role in our general inventory, and that there's many tenants that seek out only new or highest grade office buildings. I am not going to debate whether Skanska, that developer, made the right decision or not. But it's very hard to sort of say, don't build a building because we don't want you to build it. What our purpose is to look at buildings that are already built and have a name. And I think we're probably going to see a couple more office buildings come through the site plan process over the next several years because we're seeing the flight to quality is so significant. And those will probably have more build to suit tenants, like in Amazon, not Amazon itself, but smaller, but most of them will build to suit. So you won't see as much of that. Okay, so, and we can talk about that later. So the idea of this overarching policy that looks at transforming obsolete office supply is grounded by this idea of shortening review time, limiting upfront costs for the investor, getting to an entitlement quicker so that those investments can be more quickly made and more significantly transform this inventory of obsolete office supply. And that means setting out clear processes, sometimes new processes, as we'll talk about with adaptive reuse. Looking at a pared down checklist, and a checklist is just shorthand for the submittal requirements. What the focus of the staff review on the key elements of the project that have an impact on the community. If the building's changing, if the building's a new construction or partial new construction, what are the elements that are review? Concise engagement, and we've talked a lot with our planning commission, and we'll be doing so again next week at their full board, full commission to talk about whether some of these projects, including the adaptive reuse, need different types of engagement, and then different standards and modifications and how they were reviewed by staff. So when we look at the policy as defined in the adaptive reuse is a first focus, as I said. It is defined in the policy, in the draft policy as such. And once again, hitting home the idea that this is primarily about a change in use. And you ask the question, well, why all this fuss about a change in use? It is right now currently very difficult within our zoning ordinance to do a change in use. It requires a major site plan amendment and doesn't often allow the flexibility that we need to do that quickly and to get that building repurposed into a higher and better use. So this is about really defining that problem and then coming up with the right solutions. And again, this is not about massive changes. It's not about tearing down buildings, rebuilding them. That is another tool that we'll be talking about in the policy, and we'll convene to study whether that can be streamlined. But in terms of the action the board's taking, in terms of a streamlined process, policy sets it up, but the actual action to create a new process is for adaptive reuse, which is, like, again, what's often called conversions. And there will be exceptions. I think one of the things that we're proud of as we think about this process is really balancing the idea of being streamlined and quick and focusing on, well, change in use and what is the impact, but that really shouldn't be a significant prolonged process. But while sort of saying, let's give the investor, the owner, the developer of the building that is doing that project the opportunity to do interesting things to the project to make it a better neighbor. So when you think about a 1960s vacant office building, the problem not only is it doesn't really work as office anymore, it isn't filled, it often has a very unimpressive ground floor. A lot of the associated development around sites around it, a lot of hardscapes, a lot of dated hardscapes. And what we found is that from other examples across the region, that the developers that are pursuing these type of projects spend a lot of time and interest in refreshing that aspect of their site and of their building because they want to lease it as a high quality, say, residential building, right? And so they want the amenity space outside. They don't want an old office plaza. They want ground floor retail that bumps out to the street and creates that lively experience. So we really want to encourage that as exceptions to change in building, but again, not new stories, not new large building additions. Next slide, please. So again, the idea that this is a new process, it is in our zoning ordinance today, when you go under the section called scheduling, which doesn't make much sense. It should be called how you amend a site plan. There's three options: major, minor, and administrative. This creates a fourth option, which is the adaptive reuse. And the reason was we felt that neither major or minor really quite captured what we were doing. There's a lot of confusion about major and minor to begin with, and that's some work being done already in that. We wanted to be very clear about what this process was. So someone coming to the county and sort of saying, how do I convert or adaptive reuse my building, has a very clear idea. It's not trying to work its way through, well, what's a minor or what's a major. Second, and this will continue, we think will significantly reduce the from approval to submission to, let's say 4 months, 3 to 4 to 5 months, which is a significant quicker pace than a major site plan amendment, which would require today to change use. Second is that it will still require county board action. And we looked at a number of alternatives because we were asked to about administrative path. And one, it's very difficult legally to justify an administrative approval of a change in use or change to the building because that was approved by a previous board. That was a previous legislative act. Each site plan is essentially its own zoning ordinance. And to have an administrative or zoning sort of change we felt, our county attorneys indicated they didn't feel it was legal. Two, it really didn't meet the spirit of what we're trying to capture here. We didn't want someone to find out after the fact that a building was covered. We still wanted a process. We still wanted the idea of people to understand and really celebrate that. Maybe a streamlined engagement process. We didn't want it to be where people just sort of someone got a permit in the permit office and you never knew about it. So it will end with a county board consideration and some appropriate concise engagement. The staff review will definitely focus on the key elements of the site that are critical to understanding the building, how the building changes relative to the adaptive reuse. So that will allow for some. And the criteria and limitations, we say flexible but focused. It definitely sets guardrails. So the two guardrails that you really are sort of critical to understand at first, this is for site plan buildings that are currently have an office as a principal use. This is not how to convert residential into hotel, a hotel into residential, or residential into something else or a school. All those can still happen in the county. This isn't the focus of this process just yet. I'd also, someone asked, well, what about by right, like Long Langston Boulevard? We understand that there may be important opportunities there. By right is much more complicated to unpack with regard to changing use, particularly since much of the by right districts don't allow a full range of uses. Like C2 doesn't allow residential except for a different process. And there's a lot of different iterations of how you have to unpack that. So it's not that we didn't think it was important. It's just something, a next step to do as part of our continued process. So again, this is not the end of our process. This is the beginning. We'll be working on this over the next year or two. I'm sure many of these ideas that are in the policy, the by right example is one. And again, I want to really stress, and this is because we get asked about this a lot, at least did, and to continue to, that this is not a backdoor to changing a major community benefit. If there was a park next to the building, there will still be a park next to the building. We may seek more investment in that park to change it, but not to change the nature of the park, but to maybe upgrade the level of quality. But this is not going to remove park. It's not going to remove a civic facility or a cultural facility in the building. It's not going to change otherwise previous agreed to environmental standards. Although we think most of the older buildings probably, if they had them, probably aren't that.
Could you just define FBC?
Form-based code.
Oh.
So FBC is form-based code. It's Columbia Pike. Columbia Pike has and they had their own zoning tool for development. There's no building right now that has been approved in the form-based code that is office. There is office buildings along Columbia Pike, but they were not form-based code.
Can you explain what by right means?
By right is a section of our ordinance where you have a site and you can go to the county directly, get a building permit, and that is your only process. The use is allowed by right, so by legal right. Short. So while we think of most of our stuff, buildings being built go through a site plan process and SPRC and commissions, those don't happen in by right. As you can imagine, you look at the landscape of Arlington, in our urban cars, not many by right, although we do see some condo projects go by right. But typically, most buildings are site.
So like the use and everything would already be within the zone.
Yeah, so our zoning district always is paramount. You do a site plan process. That still defines what uses are allowed. And then the site plan process is an ability for the board, for staff, and then ultimately the board to work through with that developer and the community what the right type of project is, right? So all by right does is sort of say, as long as you meet the use and a bunch of standards, like this is the parking ratio you have to have, this is the setback you have to have. Reason why it's not used as much is the parking ratios are out of date, the setback standards are out of date. Most developers look at so the density isn't that great if they're CO 1.5 districts, CO 2.5, they're 1 and 1.5 FAR, so they're not significant. So most developers that have a viable site within a planning district will go through the site plan process. And then obviously one of the things this policy will do is sort of say the purposing of obsolete office buildings in any form is a public priority, but obviously needs to speak or at least acknowledge other public priorities and important goals, including things like our sector plans, which often talk about visions in terms of height and density, but also in terms of, which is an issue because some will say, well, it wasn't that supposed to be a 30-story building that had a new park next to it. Now it's going to stay a 12-story building that's not delivering that, and that's a question that will be very transparently discussed. The board will look at our affordable housing plan. This is not a tool for affordable housing. We've met with our housing commission. I think they have understood that this process is not, affordable housing is not as simple, although it's not included, certainly. What we're obviously talking about tonight, which is the energy plan and other energy policies and guidelines, and then parking policies, which obviously allow typically significant modifications in parking requirements per policy in ordinance. Okay. So when I said the adaptive reuse is part of an overarching policy, this is kind of what I meant. The policy also looks at other tools that the policy sets up, but we don't have yet a zoning ordinance or change that we'll be working on these, but not in front of the board in November. That's everything from pre-construction switches. So this is where, think of a site that is a vacant site where a sector plan or previous entitlement says it was going to be office, but it was never built. This is a process when you get a site plan amendment process, you come in and change of use, but it's not for an existing building. We talked about adaptive reuse. Office building repositioning is simply where the use is staying the same, but someone's investing in the building to make it a more competitive office project. But it's often a very significant, it's not minor renovations like a lobby or like new carpet. It's significant new renovations, often very typically similar to adaptive reuse types of changes in the building in terms of really trying to spruce up the building and the site around it. Adaptive reuse plus and partial redevelopment. So when we talk about redevelopment, we're seeing a lot of different types of redevelopment in the county. The full redevelopment at the bottom is what we typically see, right? Someone comes in and has a building or a site, comes in with a site plan amendment, says, I want to tear down whatever's on the site, start new, build deep, build garage, build superstructure, finish it. It's a 4-year process of building. It's a 6-year, 7-year process from start to finish. We are seeing a lot of what we call partial redevelopment, which is where folks are sort of keeping the garage and the podium in a way of sort of one, making the finances work, but also saving some of that time. You know, if you think about, and I'm sure many of you know this, if you think about a typical construction project, by the time you see a building being torn down, from when you see something above grade again is 9 to 12 months at best. And that's if you don't have any dominion issues or utility issues or the weather doesn't treat you poorly. That a year in of itself is just digging out a hole and then refilling the hole back in. You keep the parking, you don't have to do that. So they're quicker, but it is still a redevelopment in that the building above it is being torn down and you're building with new use. And then adaptive reuse plus is a bit of a niche. We've seen one project, 220 20th in Crystal City, about 10, 15 years ago, where it's you take a building, let's say an office building, you keep the main building and then you build on top of it. So you're not tearing down the building, you're adding to an existing structure. These are pretty unique for a number of reasons you can imagine. Once you go through all that hassle up, you'll say, why don't I just tear it down? 2, not all buildings can support an extra 3 or 4 stories. They weren't structurally built, but some of the old BRAC buildings in Crystal City, those things were built like tanks, so they could they could handle a lot more. So, but we don't see a lot of this, but we still want to figure out the process because we don't want to guess at the market. We want to. So all these sort of things we'll look at: the submitter requirements, the review and engagement, the county policies and site plan standards, the method of cost and height and density modification, particularly when density it becomes more of an issue of urban density than say adaptive reuse. And then our Economic Development Commission has really talked about financial incentives and public-private partnerships. I can tell you from our work, regulatory streamlining has been our primary focus. We think that is the best thing the county can do. And as a county taxpayer, I can say I feel the same, which is that the less money we have to give out versus just changing our rules appropriately so that it costs someone else less money to do business with us is a win-win for everyone. So that has been our focus, but there will be, I'm sure, discussions over the next year or two about further partnership structures that could be used to further incent this type of behavior.
Mark, I know we're running out of time.
Yeah.
Do you have a?
Yeah, we can go through the rest very quickly. I'll set up the discussion. So again, not much to say in this new amendment process, implementing the policy. Next slide. Again, a lot of this already discussed. The zoning ordinance amendment establishes that public priority in the zoning ordinance, and then does all those things we talked about. including earning density. Next slide. And so the types of density we're talking about, if you think about this list, I won't go through all of them. Some are very technical, just finding GFA when the building doesn't change at all. Some of them are things that you would look and say, that building's a lot better with balconies, that building is a lot better with ground floor. It's not adding stories, it's not doing those sort of things. And all of those are required. The county board has a finding to allow for that density to be earned, including it's consistent with the change of use, the overall interest in the public realm. And then a lot of the design standards that go into administrative regulations will be obviously still applied here, just maybe in a different context. Okay. Again, administrative, we're going to talk about this. The back end engine of how we work on site plans is very important to actually getting from entitlement to construction. And then again, that this is a public priority as a summary, public sense of urgency. That adaptive reuse projects do have different economics and construction challenges. Things like putting in new utilities for residential, for instance, plumbing. If you are a tension construction where you have rebar in every floor plate, the contractor spends a lot of time trying to find what part of the floor to dig a hole into to allow the plumbing to go up. And because you can't start cutting those for tension or the building falls down, right? So, cast in place, a little easier, where you just are doing slabs, but most of our buildings still are very tension. And that then limits about the creativity of how you can get. You're really sort of trying to find as much space you can to get utilities up, versus sometimes that creates some natural guardrails on what you can actually do to the building from a performance standpoint. Again, different way of looking at it from a market risk and a capital sourcing. But one of the things I want to leave this commission with, and as we talk with everyone, is that the goal still here is to repurpose, but it does improve the existing condition. And when someone says, well, I'd like to get more out of that project. Well, it could just stay the same for the 10 years. And that, in the case of green building, for instance, those buildings are horribly performing old buildings. And not taking the steps to repurpose them in some way, if they're not ready for redevelopment, are not appropriate for redevelopment in this time, is really a lost opportunity to be able to at least get the improvements. And many of these improvements that happen to the building through adaptive reuse are major upgrades. New systems by definition today are, you can tell me, I'm not the expert, light years ahead of what they were 60 years ago, right? So the idea that even just new windows and new systems sort of is a huge benefit is something that we like to talk about, but certainly want to hear your thoughts.
Okay.
Yeah, and this is something you can just read. This just looks at it. The important point here, takeaway, is that there's two elements. There's the baseline standards that go into guidance on what we expect from every project in terms of green building. And then there's the green building incentive program. That is the incentive program. That is, and I know you have a meeting, talking about the letter for that later, but is the process someone can go into, right? That says, I want to get an incentive. What do I have to do to get that? This will deal mostly, because we don't need additional density to this project, we'll deal mostly with just the base standards we want to have and you can have to reuse. And then, not to steal Dimitri's thunder, but then obviously if there's an incentive structure, financial incentive structure, that would also maybe apply for such a project. So this is really just to make sure that we're not talking.
Right.
This isn't, these will be set up administratively. So again, the policy statement says the same thing.
How many more slides?
The three of them. So,
Okay.
sorry over time. It's a lot to go through.
You started, you got handed the baton late, but anyway, thank you. That was really interesting.
Absolutely.
Questions for Mark?
Yeah, what have the developers identified that short time frame as something that's really, you just mentioned something very insightful about converting an old office building into, the main thing that they may consider is residential housing, and that they can't drill through. So it may not be the time.
Yeah.
All this focus is on compressing the time and making it easier administratively, but that may not be the challenge of developers facing and reusing an office building to make it into low-income housing. But
yeah, we think the ones that have the buildings that they've done the due diligence on, and they can make the construction work. There's two time savings, one which we control. So we control the point from submittal coming in, or really 1A and 1B. The submittal coming in, application coming in, us reviewing it and getting the county board approval for the application. Right? Then there's the other part of the process, which is after entitlement, our permitting process, right? Our inspection services division. And then there's the other part, which is that really more market driven, is how quickly from when you get the go ahead can you start construction, spend the money, and get to revenue coming. And that's why these types of activities have continued to gain momentum in the marketplace, because capital's looking and sort of saying, in this really weird capital markets, one of the things that's often driving a lot of decisions is, if I make a decision, I can't wait around 6 years to see the next major capital markets crisis and what it's going to do to. If I'm going to put my money in, I want to know I can do the project, and then we can invest in the project, and then we can get to a finished product as quickly as possible. So that is driving a lot of the momentum towards doing more of these. So we're trying to solve our part, which is, let's do enough of a review so we know what we're getting. We're not just sort of saying, hand them the keys, and it's just sort of saying, just do what you want, but that we're making it as short as possible, and then letting that construction timeline also benefit us from turning from the tax rolls quicker.
The questions?
Yeah. Trying to think, at what point in the process do they actually engage? I mean, they've got a building, they want to do something with it. What kind of preliminary do they need to do before they come to you to say, yeah, we're going to convert this into apartments, and we've thought that, because, that's, from a sustainability point, that the conceptual and design process is pretty critical.
Yeah.
To getting, because, again, you're going to strip this whole buildings in most cases. So you got a huge opportunity to make this much more sustainable, much more energy efficient, replace all the gas systems with electric and all that. But they have to, they need to be thinking about that at that point. So I'm just kind of wondering is, how much have they really kind of thought through before they would approach the county and in terms of saying this is what we want to do?
Yeah, so this is where the administrative guidelines, having them up front, is important. So a developer that on day one says, I'd like to think about doing adaptive reuse, can download something on the kind of website. And these are the standard conditions we're going to ask you. And we're going to be in a process of testing that with the market, right? I think we're going to test how much we can push the market, but also be very mindful of, we don't want to ask too much and then have nothing happen. Since the first priority of this policy, and we'll hear from the board in 2 weeks, but is that removing an obsolete office supply has a broader impact, right? So I think the answer to the question is, having the standards up front allows for that. Don't think of it as a negotiation where they come in and sort of say, well, we've already made up our mind, and now here's what we're going to get. They'll know up front about whether we're going to ask for A, B, and C, right? And that's going to get you technical, and that's outside of my lane, I'll be frank with you. That's why I rely on my colleagues in the county, such as Dimitri and her team, that what things to ask and what things to sort of push for. So I think, and then ultimately it still requires a county board approval. So if they come in and don't meet the standards and try to say, well, I just want a county board vote, as always, they can go to the county board and they can make the case in front of the county board, and the county board will also have those standards and also be able to be briefed by staff and find out if that project meets what we think is an appropriate level of standards for that. I'll also mention that one of the things that we certainly will encourage, even more so than we do now, is early as possible check-in with our inspection services division. So a lot of that gets you at least to a level of what the Virginia Building Code requires. And I know often we want to exceed Virginia Building Code in many areas, but that at least gets many of the lessons learned from other places was when a developer would come in, focus so much on the land use, sort of say, I should probably check with the building official, and found out there were 10 things that they needed to change post entitlement because they hadn't thought about how the building code can be applied. And that's everything from green building standards, things like that, but also just basic things like office buildings have single bathroom floors, right? What do you do with those? Because you can't have single bathroom floors in today's residential environment for code or for just market. And so what do you do with that? And someone found out creatively, well, you can use that as secondary ADA space. You can keep them and they actually meet ADA requirements for visitors. So things like that are, but that only happens when they meet with the ISD early on.
So you're going to county board for an RTA, a request to advertise in November.
No, November's the action.
You've already got your.
Yes.
Yeah, November action. Thank you.
Okay, well, I think that we are out of time. So thank you, Mark, very much.
Yeah, if you have any questions, please, myself, Demetra, please ask us. We're trying to be, and again, the next two critical dates, if you're really interested in this, are, looks like Monday, November 4th, will be the planning commission meeting on this. Although that's just tentative, but it'll be the 4th or 6th, and then it'll be at the county board either on Saturday or Tuesday. So there'll be obviously those public discussions.
It is really exciting because it is a huge problem and I'm glad that the county's working to address it.
Yeah, and again, we've been told something's broke, try to fix it, and we don't fix it right, we'll fix it. We'll get in a new
Right.
plumber.
Yeah, it's change the tires as you drive.
Yeah.
Right. Well, thank you very much.
All right. Thank you much for your time. Sorry I went over a little bit.
It's fine. Okay, so I know we have a number of topics and I'm going to consent program most, but because we have a quorum, I want to be sure to approve two things. One is the September notes, which Jenna circulated, and I assume nobody has any comments on them. I put in some comments.
I had a few. I think you done took care of.
Yeah,
I think I accepted everything as of 5.
right. So, kind
I
of.
changed the spelling of my name. I don't know if that made it in there.
I changed that too.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes. Anyway.
Correct there, but in the text it was.
Okay. Well, that must be the right issue. Anyway, can I have a motion?
I move to approve.
Okay, and anyone opposed? Okay, online, right, minutes are passed. I also want to try because we have a quorum, I want to get our SPRC letter out because that's happening. I was the SPRC rep for Crystal Houses 7 and 8. There are 42 townhouses. They are all electric. They will not even have gas lines. So I went to the SPRC meeting. There's only one for this project. And Doug, I think you would come too. I used our score sheet and I got a score of 74. Our score sheet doesn't work perfectly for individually owned townhouses because all these townhouses will have 2-car garages. All the spaces will be wired for EV, but none of them actually have EV because they're waiting for the person to move in to decide which, but they're all wired. But the way our score sheet works, that doesn't give them the top score. Similarly, they're all wired for people to put in solar, but it's up to the individual homeowners to take advantage of all of the things that Doug's worked for, like solar tax exemption. But anyway, so it'll be up to the individual homeowners to put in solar. So it got a score of 74, but I think it's a great project. They're getting Earthcraft Gold. I said it'd be great if they were getting Earthcraft Platinum. It'd be great if they were able to do more. They are, redoing their plantings to be even more native plant, non-invasive, whatever. They got some public criticism that they were using. But again, most of the plantings will be whatever whoever buys the townhome and puts in the front yard. So there's a lot of things that aren't. So I put a note at the top that says this project is not strictly comparable on an apples to apples basis to our other scores. And then I explained because the individual homeowners. Anyway, so I got no comments on this letter from anybody or on the checklist that I filled out. So I guess as the SPRC rep for this one, I would move for approval of this letter, but I'm open to discussion. This project had previously been approved in 2019 for 21 townhouses. It was bought by a new developer who doubled it by making them smaller and adding a story. But because they're below grade, by adding a story, they're still only the same height as the other surrounding single-family homes. So the community is totally in a rare occurrence. The community was very supportive of doubling the density. It's right by the metro, right by the Crystal City Metro. So any questions?
Which metros?
Crystal City Metro.
That's good. They don't have flood problems there. They don't. Yeah.
So that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they're all, yeah. Shading up.
I'll second your motion.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. All right. So now that gets us to the main event of the evening, I think, which is now that we have the other vote. So the Green Building Incentive Program. We've been, I think that what we would like to do tonight is really agree on the things that we would like to say in principle. One certainly is that we are very supportive of more pathways, the boldness, vision, adding the existing buildings, adding adaptive reuse, which will tie into what we're just hearing about. And Dimitri, do you have are you planning to do a presentation that ties into what Mark was saying, or?
We're not going to do that in respect, because I thought you would probably take a while on this letter. And there were a couple of things I know that I sent out, and it went out to the Energy Committee, but I also copied John. I watched I got a call and they said, you might want to watch the last Energy Committee meeting about the GBIP, because there were a couple of questions that were raised. So I responded to everybody and tried to answer those questions, and also attached a copy of one of the main presentation texts. Since then, very, very quickly, I'm not going to take a lot of time. There have been a couple of comments that have made their way and questions to me. And before we get into the letter, I just want to clarify them. One I kind of alluded to, which is there was a question that was raised about, well, did AIR, invent this all on their own and without kind of the internal and external socialization? Doug, in one of the responses to the Energy Committee, I gave you guys in that kind of red type, just a kind of data dump on all of the outreach. There's even more than that. In terms of specifically developers, we went to NAOP, we're going back to NAOP. NAOP formed a special committee. We went to the chamber. We had 2 industry days for the industry. Paul and Vicky are conducting individual one-on-ones with developers. So there's been a lot of developer engagement to get their input and just reaction to it and to answer their questions, because it is a brand new model. In terms of the tax incentives, and I know this goes back, we discussed this in April of this year. There are 3 jurisdictions in the Commonwealth, Virginia City, Charlottesville, and Roanoke, that have these tax incentives for green buildings. However, Virginia law, once again, so brilliant, is so rigid. And the reason, because in our first pass of this model, we did have tax incentives. And then we started working with the county attorney's office specifically on the incentives and the kind of vehicles through which they could be paid, et cetera. And Donnie came back and said, I have bad news. Virginia law doesn't allow you any variation whatsoever in the rates of tax incentives you would give. So it was the same regardless of whether it was LEED, whether it was FIOS, whether it was Earth Cathar, and it had to be the same for new construction as it was for existing buildings. So as you can imagine, and even if you look at the 3 that have had it, Charlottesville is the oldest one. They've had it for almost 11 years. And the total amount of incentive money they paid out in almost 11 years is $300,000. So it's that kind of constraint of the Virginia law that just made it just too inflexible for us. And you could see it just was going to, kind of cripple the program and the idea of the incentives. So that, Jen, is why we kind of abandoned the incentives and went into, we don't need to go into the detail, but we're looking at treating it as a grant program. AED does this commonly with a lot of its incentive programs for business. And we might even ask if, they could be paid through AED directly from, the source of the fund. So that's about the incentives. And obviously, we're also doing a lot of external outreach as well. But I want to stop there and let you get into the letter and ask the questions that you may want to clarify.
I think first, as I said, I think we should have some agreement in principle about what we want to say in the letter, and then we can figure out how to say it in the letter. But one thing I think we want to say is to applaud staff, and I think Demetra, this was your leadership, your baby, and
I was the conceptual author, but I have to give credit to Jenna and Vicky and Paul. They just
yes, team effort. But anyway, it is very exciting. It is very yeah. Hello, everybody. It is very, we are very excited about it. We want to be sure that that message comes across. across, and we also want to be sure that nothing that we do, not that I think we necessarily have this power, but that we don't slow it down because you're leaving, and we want you to have the fewest obstacles in your path to get done what you need to do before you leave. Although I realize other people, will pick it up, I hope, and run.
Theme is correct. So,
So I think we have agreement on that, but then I think one controversial issue between, and I've spent time talking to Joan and time talking with Doug, but not all three of us, because that would be a violation of the open public meetings rule. So, but we've had a number of conversations. I think one issue that's come up is asking that the buildings be all electric. And not, that isn't something that we are, of course, from a climate change perspective, we like that. You've been getting a lot of input from developers. We all recognize that if no developers take up this, use this policy, this incentive program, just like none of them, practically no one used the higher tiers of the old one. So we were wondering if tell us more about why you didn't go for all electrification in this, because we want to get rid of fossil fuels.
right. In terms, and I'm going to, because we do have Vicki and Paul on the phone, and they are architects. I'm neither an architect nor an engineer, but I play one on teams. So, but in brief, there's, as you can see, really strong incentives and a strong program and education and everything going behind really persuading new construction to go into the realm of this and ILFI, Living Future Institute standards, and also demonstrating, and Paul and Vicki has done exhaustive research and really tracked how the cost premiums have democratized more over the years, and actually are far more competitive than LEED, and looking at the payback and the performance of building afterwards. When it comes to existing buildings, and I wish Mark was still here, because we started, if you remember, back when we did the 6-month cohort with WPI on adaptive reuse, we started our really intense partnership with AED. The buildings that they have are generally for repurposing, adaptive reuse, retro commissioning, are in the age vintage of 1960s to 1980s. And you can only imagine the code, Virginia code isn't great now. You can only imagine how awful it must have been back then. So Vicki, Paul, and just before I turn it over to them as the subject matter experts, I did want to let you know that it's going to be a white paper. It's not going to be a major treatise or anything, but we thought that it was important for the public, for the board, everybody, to have a white paper study done by a third party, consultant that just looked specifically at this issue, the opportunities and the challenges of looking at existing buildings, particularly at that vintage in Northern Virginia, and what it means to ask, just to get a sense of how far are we asking developers to go? Are the incentives scaled to that? And where's the good balance? So Paul, Vicki, I'm going to turn it over. The question, I just want to make sure you heard it, is why did we not go for, particularly in existing buildings, an adaptive reuse, a strict requirement of total electrification?
Yep, thanks, Demetra, and thanks for that question, Cindy. As Demetra mentioned, we welcome developers to pursue higher standards at a voluntary basis. What's in the current Green Building Incentive Program is what's required to follow at each FAR level. In terms of what we're proposing, keeping new construction pretty similar to the traditional pathway, aside from the climate adaptation pathway using FIAS, incentivizing them using a financial or monetary incentive to pursue a higher standard. Throughout these conversations with developers, going through the industry workshops, doing the benchmarking literature review of other jurisdictions, not only within our kind of local region, but nationally too. I think when you're looking at, specifically when you're looking at existing buildings or older buildings that have obviously older systems in place, and maybe the integrity of the structure and the existing systems and kind of the facade and the envelope and different changes that would need to be involved within retrofitting to let's say a net zero energy building or a all electric building. Not every project is a one size fits all approach. As we know, there's a feasibility study that's involved. And when you're thinking from the developer's perspective, that digs into high initial costs, as I mentioned before, whether there's structural limitations with older buildings and putting in newer systems. There's also the disruption to building operations. I mean, if you're thinking of if it's not a fully vacant building, if it's a commercial building and there's still tenants or occupants within that space, and you're dealing with a full-scale retrofit to a net zero energy building, with that maintenance and construction going on, and in that timeline of schedule, even though they are shorter typically compared to new construction projects, there's that built in as well. So we have to think of the human aspect too, or at least developers do. I mean, we can implement policy, but at the end of the day, it's up to the developers to apply for this program and to voluntarily opt into one of these pathways. So yeah, I think when you're looking at these different design considerations from an architectural perspective, even engineering, just based on the systems, there's things to consider in that it's not a one size fits all approach, unfortunately, even with code, when you're looking at other jurisdictions. Vicky, feel free to jump in if you have anything else.
I hear you on the existing buildings. So Vicky, maybe you want to talk about the new buildings. I see the question in the chat.
So are we talking Christine or
The-
new?
Yeah, the electrification, why is electrification not a baseline requirement for new buildings? So is that the question you want to turn to now as opposed to the question of electrification in existing buildings? I mean, it is, if it's certainly for FIAS or the ILFI rating systems, that's a must, electrification. But we still have the traditional pathway. That's giving developers an option essentially, but at a higher certification level for if they're following LEED V4, they have to do platinum. They can, under the traditional pathway, they can opt to do electrification for one of their extra items. But no, we're not requiring it. And it's something that I think that we could implement in the update or the next phase, but it's really a market question. Will they agree to do LEED V4 Platinum? We're getting some pushback there. LEED V5, I think, is more conducive if you're really looking at kind of electrification in that realm. But of course, that isn't yet on the street as a rating system. It's not finally balloted. But no, I mean, it's just a market consideration why it's not required for
Because
the LEED pathway, the traditional pathway.
Developers that they wouldn't do it.
They wouldn't do it, but something you just said, Vicky, and Paul touched upon it too, and I want to throw something out to you because it just came to me. So we're looking on this as generally kind of a pilot because it's just such a new model and every, conceivable aspect of it. But the LEED 5 is going to, while it's not controlling or governing now, it is going to be early within this 5-year period. So is there maybe some language to recommend in the new policy regarding that switch over to LEED 5? Where we could ask for more then? Or no?
Oh, well, we're certainly hoping that, if they're faced with the choice of doing LEED V4 Platinum or LEED V5 Gold, we hope that will impel them towards LEED V5 Gold and its higher standards. I mean, LEED V4, it's been around for over 10 years. It's it's an outdated rating system in so many ways. And yeah, we're it's all a big unknown. We don't know, this is a risk. I mean, we don't know if, we're talking to these developers, they're quite interested in FIAS. They're very unsure about it, which is why we're doing this education program. And I think we're very interested to see, what they choose here. But I wouldn't be surprised if we get more interest in FIAS as a result of, they're hearing more about it and they're understanding more that it's really coming our way, literally, in this kind of wave of projects coming down from Massachusetts and New York City and into our region. Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Now, if they built to lead 5, could they build with gas systems still? I mean, or is lead 5 all electric?
No, I don't think it's all electric.
So that doesn't get to the main issue is we keep having them build under lead and putting in gas systems, which lock in carbon emissions for decades.
Look, I mean, obviously, this is the advisory commission to the board. So this, I don't mean to tell you that, in your role and in your mandate to advise the board as you see fit. I think that if we go for a strict mandate, you invite kind of disassociation by developers with the program. They, will go some other route to get bonus density. Because don't forget, we're not giving any financial incentives for LEED. Because LEED is modeled and it's not measured. And we did want to reward with financial incentives something that is really clear on whether it's performing as advertised. So you can recommend it, and it'll be up to the board to adopt what they want to adopt. I think we could probably expect a disassociation from that. From a lot of reasons, the cost, but I think more than anything, I think the cost is going to deal with the existing infrastructure, Dominion infrastructure, and the fact that they're being asked to spend huge amounts of money to beef up the infrastructure for really what is notional, EV infrastructure, charging infrastructure. So if we start telling them that whole building systems are going to be electrified, I think that's going to incur a cost. And I think it's not just the cost, it's that, Paul and Vicky, correct me if I'm wrong, but over the past 3 or 4 years, the complaint has been, we're developers. Why are we paying for Dominion's infrastructure?
That's a good question.
And the county does too, so whenever we've got to upgrade something, which is pretty often.
Let's start talking to our legislatures. Fix that problem.
So other comments about the letters, about the approach to the county. Doug.
I have 2 quick questions for Demetra. First, I was told, I haven't looked this up myself, but I was told that the traditional pathway reduces the EV ready requirement from 15% to 10%. In other words, currently it's 15% under the current version, but this reduces it to 10%. Is that accurate or?
Yeah, that was actually consistent. And Paul, I'll ask you to speak more specifically to that because LEED 5 goes to 10%. So it's being consistent with the new standard. That's one thing. Plus, the ratio, the parking ratios are going down in new construction for spaces, per tenant, number of tenants. So Paul, I'm sure you can be more articulate than I just was. About the
No, that was accurate to me. Just one minor clarification, Doug. It aligns with the LEED version 4.1 credit. LEED version 5 will remain the same, but there's an addendum to LEED version 4.1 for that standard, dropping that to the 10%. So the baseline prerequisite aligns with the LEED credit.
If we've been going for years at 15% and we're getting some uptake, why would we, play devil's advocate, why would we reduce that now?
And I, when we talk about EV ready, what we're really talking about is the conduits. So they can put the wiring in that has, at this point, nothing to do with Dominion. Obviously, they'll have to deal with Dominion when they get to it. But if they don't have the wiring in the ready, then, they've got major extra costs to
Right,
retrofit.
the wiring has to ultimately connect to the infrastructure, and it's, whenever they go in with a design, they have to issue a load letter, as you know, to Dominion. And Dominion is not infrequently rejecting the load letter and saying, we can meet this standard if you pay another, $800,000 for a new transformer. Again, these are all kind of give and take things. The other thing that I think, and Vicky and Paul are better judges of this because they have the direct contact with all the developers. In site plan review, they're trying to do green buildings and they're looking for something that gives them more greenhouse gas emissions reductions for the buck. And the EV SE it doesn't do that.
Yep.
So
Okay, yeah.
yeah.
And that, it's broader EV or greenhouse gas emissions, which don't count.
Now, what
For
I
building
would love
operations.
to do is actually put in e-bike chargers, banks of e-bike chargers, and really encourage,
Yeah.
particularly in those areas like Crystal City and Clarendon and Ballston and Roslyn, where it's really
There was a-
conducive towards that micro mobility.
A lot of discussion about that at these 42 townhomes at that.
So I have just one other question then real quick. And that is, so on October 7th at the webinar, whatever it was, you said something that there would be a county attorney review.
Yeah.
And I don't know the scope of that. The only idea that I had was that I wasn't sure if, the county could make direct payments to building owners or developers. You mentioned something about running it through AED. A minute ago.
That's an option as a grant.
But my question is there anything you can tell us about that county attorney review? Because, obviously
Mhm.
part of the review, process here, if we're going to take it if it's going to go to the board, I assume the board's going to want to know what the county attorney thought of it.
We spoke to them in the beginning about the taxes, and then we looped them in again, and they're currently close to completing their exhaustive research, because I said, okay, we can do it under a grant program, structured like a grant program. Are there other types of mechanisms that we can use, direct payments or, some other kind of financial, kind of transaction of some type? So they're doing that, and they're also at the same time looking at the vehicles for how that money is actually turned over, it's transferred. The other thing too is obviously when you look at the PowerPoint, you'll see that it's not payable all at once.
Right.
There's certifications that are required before and the existing buildings pathway and the adaptive reuse pathway is payable over 5 years. So there's certification again every single year to maintain the performance, to demonstrate that there's a maintained
Who's going to do that?
performance of the building.
It's going to, yeah, that's the question, right?
Paul, who does the certification?
For the existing buildings pathway, that would be the Energy Star certification. To the adaptive reuse, which is only a one-time payment upon the award, or upon completion of the project and certification, is USGBC.
Yeah.
So the certifications are not really a problem. It's the payments that might be a little fuzzy.
And the other thing, it's kind of related, is I also got a query indirectly from one of the members of the board about why are you only scaling now for 5 projects? And I think what happened was Paul and Vicky really did exhaustive research and looked at actual buildings that had been done under the GBIP and used them as exemplars for the scale of buildings, the square footage, et cetera. And they came up with kind of 5 examples, but those 5 examples we carried over into the adaptive reuse, the existing buildings. So they're multiplied by each of those columns. So I'm sorry if that was confusing to people, but no, we're looking at. Oh, Vicky, I think you told me that over the last like 3.5 to 4 years, the GBI has done, I think, 14 projects. Now 7 of those, I think it was up to 50% were grandfathered into the prior program. So we were trying to approximate over a 5-year period, roughly the same amount of projects number.
But it's just a guesstimate and
Yeah.
not binding or anything at all. And you want maximum uptake. We want to get every existing building to take advantage of
It's
this.
interesting because we can't identify who because it's premature, but Paul has already had developer reach out about an adaptive reuse and said, when do you think the new program is going to be adopted?
Well, I mean, ideally, you'd want every project, actually, whether it's an existing building or a new building, to be IS or ILFI. I mean, that's just the standard. So how you structure this way to make it that this is the smartest way for people to go. You know, and how much money is that gonna cost? And that's where you start, you know, I've been through enough budgetary meetings to know that there's gotta be caps there and just, you know, kind of expecting that all of that, you know, how do you finance that? So kind of.
I've also asked them, to look at, I mean, granted, you know, ideally you want to steer away from debt service.
Yeah.
But I also asked county attorney's office to look at, you know, can it be a CIP, you know, a short-term, you know, 5 to 10 year CIP program? Because if you look at now granted, they're slightly different, but if you look at Chicago's, for example, oh God, where's the place in New Mexico that's got a lot of adaptive? Is it Albuquerque? Where they have huge districts, Chicago in particular, of adaptive reuse, where the program is really scaled on a very, very, very large scale. Adaptive reuse programs have common elements, really successful ones. And actually CIP programs, capital improvement programs, as the mechanism, the platform for that is pretty common in the larger scaled programs.
And in every one of them, you're gonna have an increased tax base.
You're gonna.
Presumably, because you're building you've got either a much better old building or new building.
But you know, now we get back to the theory of the ramp though, which is that's what you're paying out of pocket. But then there's kind of like, okay, number one, what is the cost of doing nothing?
Yeah.
And number two, what are the benefits that you get?
Yeah.
Presumably, if you're taking these buildings and particularly these really stale buildings that are, you know, kind of just having such high vacancy rates, the kind of cascading impact on local businesses and everything starts to go down. So you're really this kind of decline, this localized decline. And if you do this, you're kind of taking the building into a second life and a renaissance, where presumably it's going to be more attractive, it's going to be more financially viable, and you're going to increase the vitality of the smaller businesses around it. So you're going to have eventually tax stimulation and stability there.
But even for the building itself, it's the basic value.
Absolutely.
And then there's the cascading effects of greater business in the area.
So other questions or comments?
Yeah, I mean, once. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Rob,
Yeah, I was just.
Okay, Rob, and then Trevor.
Okay. Just quick clarification. You said 14 buildings in the last 3 or 4 years have gone through that, the incentive program. How many have not?
You say go
My
through the
God.
program, you qualify for
God.
the process.
Paul, do we even keep a running track of buildings, or is there a mechanism for us to keep track of the number of new constructions, design and construction that doesn't even come through the GBIP?
Well, the one they go through the site plan SPRC process, which you have to do for the GBIP anyway.
What is the rough percentage, do you think, that just doesn't avail themselves of the GBIP?
Fairly small at this point, I think.
Yeah, I would say maybe between 20 and 30%. Yeah, I mean, we can look at that internally. I know yeah, we can look through the site plans and go through the past 4 or 5 years and even before that, throughout the whole history of the program. But yeah,
The ones that we followed, which we follow most of the SP, except for they
Right.
often have a few odd ones.
Those are the ones.
I mean, the Sunrise Project on Glebe Road was the only one that I remember that specifically did not do.
I had one.
And I don't want to steal, but I think might be Trevor's comments.
Yeah.
But we have been for a few months now talking, we've been looking at Green Bank because that's still, being baked looks in this area in Northern Virginia. But we're looking at, okay, can we use the CPACE, the new CPACE program
Right.
to leverage? The only thing that I want to make sure, and you'll understand this one, is that the CPACE program does not have any SIR. Because we have very strictly defined requirements, performance requirements. We may be able to use, provided that a developer who wants to go through the GBIP and also use CPACE and this capital stack is willing to obviously meet the criteria. But there has never been an SIR in the county program.
What's an SIR?
It's the savings investment ratio. So it's
Okay.
that kind of performance calculus.
Trevor, over to you. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, just one comment and then one question. The comment is that, there's a fair amount of federal incentives, and I'll call it subsidized capital, that's going to be put against these types of retrofits and new construction. And so if you think about some of the federal programs that are going on right now and the grant programs, specifically the Nationally Clean Investment Fund, they're really pushing to net zero for all new construction. And so although developers may push back now, look, this is all a function of change, right? Change is hard. And but ultimately, the federal government is moving in that direction. And so I just would encourage everybody to think, years forward, because in my opinion, the ball is rolling in that direction. Second is that, this concept of bonus density, which I'm kind of new to, but, it kind of, you have these, two sliding scales for developers, right? One is, how much do you want them to do from a green perspective? And the second is, well, what do you give them in return for it? The in return for seems to have still been locked in with the same sort of bonus density metrics that were used under the prior program. I guess a query I would have is, was there any thought to, well, are those the right categories and amount of bonus density to appropriately incentivize developers to execute on the the energy transition and electrification incentives that we want?
I've done a lot of talking, and I'm going to ask Victoria and Paul as the subject matter experts to answer that.
So it turns out that most projects in the GBIP were they loved the incentive of 0.25 or 0.35 FAR, bonus density. So I think we had one or two above that at 0.45 and 0.55 FAR and none at 0.7 FAR. So we know that the lower levels of bonus density are appealing to them. What we're asking developers now is whether the added, cash incentives would make going to FIAS and, more appealing. There's a lot of interest in the cash incentives. It depends on the developer you talk to, but this question of why we're still keeping bonus density, we did go down the road of these, as Demetra explained, tax incentives where we would not have used bonus density at all. And then thanks to the fact that we're Dillon Rural State, we would have had to apply the tax abatement to every category of green building, including LEED, which we didn't want to do.
Yeah, I understand that. Look, I'm not trying to question the concept of bonus density. I think it's a good one, especially in light of our constraints within the Commonwealth. I guess, how do we know 0.25 and 0.35 are the right numbers? What if it was 0.3 and 0.4, with 0.4 being full electrification? Like, if you want to flesh out whether or not developers are willing to do something, you kind of have to put it in front of them and give them a real opportunity to either
Trevor,
execute or not.
Yeah, they've had that in front of them, though. We had 3 other levels of FAR that nobody touched.
Understood.
And obviously, we were requiring higher standards, the higher FAR. And, you know, that's why we kind of, it's not a science yet, and it's not totally predictable. But when you start having these kind of very hard mandates, even the bonus density just becomes non-interested, you know, just not of any interest to them. And they go off and just get their bonus density through another avenue under the
That's what we run into. It's very easy for them to pay into the affordable housing fund to get a lot of their bonus density. Plus they might, you know, donate for a park and things like that. So, you know.
Community benefit. Rob, you sent out a note earlier today about other things, other kinds of incentives that were.
Yeah, tax incentives was one of them, and I thought the reduction in property tax or whatever, but the, you know, technical assistance was on that list as well, and including technical assistance for maybe applying for the 179D energy efficiency property tax credit. I'm not sure how attractive that is if developers are claiming it now. I just don't know. Have you heard from them on that?
I haven't heard much activity under that, but have you, Victoria and Paul?
No.
But
No.
it's just another, it's just another opportunity for us to offer to them tax incentives. We can't obviously be their lawyers, but we can say, hey, this is paying $1.80 per square foot for your building. This is essentially a financial incentive that the federal government's putting out. And if you haven't used it before, tapped it before, get some basic information, direct them here.
Well, the incentives will be under the umbrella of the outreach and education, which is mainly about, you know, FIOS and the new, you know, kind of standards, but also about adaptive reuse, also about existing buildings, and also about incentives. So that will be there. And the other thing that we've overlooked, because it's small, but I think it's important, is we also put $25,000 up front for the kind of assessments that Paul was talking about. So there's no risk to them and having to say, well, why don't you kind of model from the get-go before you actually sit down and start designing the building? Why don't you model it under a FIOS standard and see how that works out in cost benefit? So there's that incentive. And, you know, the tax just proved to be really constrictive. I would be surprised unless Fairfax is trying to, you know, kind of artificially contain the investment in the program.
So it's almost 9 o'clock, and despite all of our best efforts, so can you talk to us a little bit about the timing? Because one of the reasons we're feeling urgency is because we know that there is a goal out in January. Need any input that we've been giving, but talk to us about the timeline, because I don't think we're approving a letter.
You know, we had planned on doing RTA in November and going to the board in December. With the CPACE ordinance, they didn't have to. There was some kind of weird voodoo that the CAO did, and translating Virginia law where the RTA was not required. That may or may not be the same under the GBIP. I think if it has to push to an RTA in December and, you know, adoption in January, I think we were trying to get to, you know, before the end of the year, because you're going to have a new board member coming on, and it's really kind of a dense program for somebody when they're drinking from 8 fire hoses already.
Melissa.
Yeah.
Our whole list of acronyms.
Oh, I'm talking about a new board.
I know.
Yeah, that board.
No, I know, but I was just saying,
Oh, yeah.
I was experiencing the drinking from the fire hose at this meeting.
So,
Yeah.
So I know that staff, you know, is willing to be flexible. I don't know what leadership is kind of how hard they're pressing their targets.
So I would like to hear from folks about how they think you know, I hear a lot of, this is a really difficult and tough issue because, again, you know, we know what we want. We would love everybody to be FIAS or ILFA, but if developers aren't going to take that up, just as we saw in the previous program. So I think it is a really hard issue. And I think that we don't have a great consensus on what we want to say on electrification, on.
Is it possible to have like a program that scales that maybe doesn't start out that way, but just think about what Trevor said about what's coming down the pike. You don't want
Right.
to lock in something that
And to
it's gonna make it
too,
easier for them to meet in the future.
saying that automatically leaves.
Just because they won't do it now doesn't mean they won't do it 2 years from now.
Right. I think that's a great point. And I don't know I mean, how do we build a program without having developers all saying we're doing bait and switch? How do we build a program that has external, like for example, if Lead 5.0 becomes the new version that we automatically upgrade to everything? I mean, we could build that in, I think, because that's an external event. But otherwise, Michaela, like technology advances and stuff gets harder for a 5-year program. And yet I feel you wanted 5 years so that people could plan, developers could plan.
Well, because we made for existing buildings an adaptive reuse that payable
Might
over
not
each of
happen.
5 years.
Right.
And we wanted to play with the model and see what the reaction to it, what the uptake, what resistance there may be, what impact the education has. We fully anticipated that at some point, and maybe this is, a nice medium compromise to strike, is if you wanted to say, we support it, we support a 5-year kind of basically pilot period, but with a revisitation of the performance of the program in 3 years.
We did that last time, and now we're still fighting. We still don't have electrification, which was the big issue that we made 4 years ago. So, and we've got 5 years to reduce our carbon emissions by 50% if we can avoid the worst of the climate crisis at this point. So,
I hate to be,
Right.
I mean, I'm not saying that you should.
Okay, then let's just
electrification.
roll up,
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, but I want to be sober-eyed about where we are now.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
digging the hole deeper isn't going to help anything.
I'm not saying that.
Yeah, just-
And we need,
I just don't want to say, if we do this, all of a sudden the future
Yeah.
is going to be,
Right.
kind of more brilliant.
That's sad. Kevin, over to you.
I haven't dug into all the details of this. I understand that there's lots of complexity, lots of reasons why people want changes, but generally I'm just very concerned with us importing incentives that are inadequate for the crisis that we are facing. And even if it is too late, this commission, I think, is charged with doing everything we can imagine that gets there. And I think anything we do which provides incentives for what we know is inadequate is really, it's certainly a wrong message and mostly just a waste of the incentives and a waste of our credibility. So I think the points that you make in the letter, we need to stick with. And just generally, I think we should stick with those for principles.
Rob?
Second that point wholeheartedly. And yes, we should, instead of trying to ratchet up and starting with a lower bar, we should set the bar high and see if we get no uptake from the developers and say, okay, well then ask them what the problem is as we're doing this, as we're trying to set this policy, and just tell them any fossil fuel use is a non-starter. So there's plenty of other communities that go 100% electric and they can do it here too. And if we provide the right incentives, they will.
I'm not trying to dissuade you from that. I'm just saying that, yes, I've lived in those communities and I've worked in those communities, and they're not Dillon rural communities, and they're not jurisdictions that are having to go around with basically a voluntary program, a discretionary program that we're not quite begging, but we're, kind of semi-begging developers to go beyond what the code is.
Well, and I think that's the strongest part of the program is actually to bake in those incentives and, a whole range of things in a toolkit. And there's there's stuff out there. It's actually getting them to put all it together and look at the cost benefits. And then, hopefully Arlington pays at the margin to kind of get them over that hump to say,
You had your hand
Oh, I was just, when everybody's thinking about this, remember, there's 4 components to this. There's traditional pathway, there's the bias clean energy one for new buildings, and there's existing buildings. So what I'm thinking in my head as you guys are talking is, I understand what you're saying is how it might apply to the traditional pathway and you want to go all electric. But do you also want to do that for existing buildings?
well, and actually what I had put in the letter is we were revising it and kind of simplifying it, is that for existing buildings, okay, energy efficiency, but have them write an electrification plan. It's the same thing you're showing to homeowners, is like, go get an energy audit and do an electrification plan. So when you have to replace, you've got something in place that you can do it. And that's just, and I think that's a compromise in terms of how do we get everybody, every building owners to think about electrification. So again, that one, and again, existing buildings can be renovated to get to pretty much IFL or FIA standards. I mean, it may be extremely difficult and probably not worth the cost for some, but, kind of encouraging as many of those as possible.
Trevor or Jonathan on Michaela, who I know has to go, and Elizabeth. Yeah.
Right.
Oh, yeah. Any questions before, any comments from anyone before you have to?
Like we need another few minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, we do need more time.
I mean, I'm concerned about waiting because if they're gonna go forward with the RTA in November and pass it, we haven't, because this is complicated, and to get our voice in front of the county board and others, now is the time. If we wait another month, then we kind of lost something.
I think if we had the ability, if we were able to agree on the substance, we could prove it in principle and then delegate to a small group to write the letter. But I don't think we have that agreement.
Well, I mean, we've got 2 letters. We could vote whether or not if there's anybody, if people are comfortable going with one or the other, or then we just have to wait, and I think we lose our window.
With respect, I don't think we lose our window. I think what
Right.
Demetra has said is that we don't have the go-ahead from the county attorney yet, and nothing's going to happen till the county attorney issues their memorandum or.
Well, it's not a go-ahead. It's just kind of like you asked us to do this research on, the number of different mechanisms, type, and the pros and cons, and here it
And
is.
the public comment period doesn't end until November 17th. So I think we should look and see what the public comment is, particularly from the business community. And I don't think we have to be the first one to jump in. I think we can wait. And
Of course, our next meeting's not till November 18th. Maybe you guys will let us put it in a public comment, but on the 19th.
Jenna will have all of the public comments.
Go through them one by one.
Well,
It's probably still a good idea to convene that small group to hammer out.
because we can't convene them because that's a violation of,
Yeah, I
we
think
can
it's
do it,
two people.
circulate.
Why couldn't you post it online?
We could post it just as we've been
It's
doing.
been
And we've
online.
got lots of comments, and thank you for those who commented on them. But I do think it would be helpful to have a sense, and I think I heard this from Kevin and Rob, that they would like to, recognizing that the board may not do this, but that they would like to say, we are the Climate Change Commission. We want to see this. I heard that over there. Is there, a consensus on that? Should we take a vote on that?
I think it's good to vote on anything right now. I think we
Yeah.
vote, and then since November 17th is the end of the comment period, we're meeting on the 18th, it's not gonna go before the board before that. Let's continue to work this draft online, everyone can comment on it, it's all, and if we have to submit it before, then we can do consensus online, right?
No, we can't.
But
We can't
We
do
gotta do
consensus
it.
online, but we could send a letter.
But we're a commission. We don't have to, there's no requirement. The commission has to have their letter by November 17th.
Well, even if there is, worst case, if we didn't vote as a commission, we could have a letter that was signed by everybody,
If you went to the board and said, we're really uncomfortable landing on a final letter before we have a clear-eyed view of what the public comment is. Staff is waiting for, a financial mechanisms report back from CAO. You know, I don't pretend to know the mind of the board, but I would find it difficult to believe that they would say, no, forget it, you lost your opportunity.
Well, no, I mean, they're not,
Yeah.
there's no timeline for this letter. It's just, this is complicated and it should be, you know, I think, you know, the quicker we get it forward, the better we're off.
Okay, so I think we have a plan forward. So John and Doug and I will do mind meld. Every meeting as a threesome. That sounds terrible, but you know what I mean. And we will post things and we'll continue to work. I know that Steve Burr is on the phone, has waited patiently for us to talk about the EV rate ordinance, which we promised we would never get to, and indeed I kept my promise. I'm sorry about that, but Doug has scheduled Steve Burr to meet the Energy Committee, and I hope the Energy Committee then write a letter for and I know you have to run your letters through C2E2. But on the other updates, I think the master transportation plan, I hope that, Joan, you can ask for our feedback by email. I'll send an email about whichever other ones of these things that I have on this list that I think are important. Jana will send out, we have solidified the 2025 schedule, all the dates for 2025, including more virtual. And I was to send those out to everybody. We had to send them to the county, but I think the county is certified. So that you can get those on your calendar for 2025. Otherwise, I think that we can be adjourned.
I would just mention two things is there's public, they're taking feedback on the GBIP. Everybody should be encouraged to go put your comments in.
Right.
There as well. I mean, you know, and the same for the master transportation plan, their plan your transportation future, please go in. And that one's actually much more personal of kind of, what do I want from transportation and those types of questions.
Like a survey.
Yeah, but then they'll have some specific questions from us as a commission in terms of, you know, what are our priorities with the master transportation. Since transportation is 40% of carbon emissions, I think it plays a big role.
And don't be surprised, my understanding, and Steve, tell me if I'm wrong, is that the board report with an RTA for the rate ordinance is going to the board in November, but that still gives, you know, a breadth of time before adoption there to be comment. And I know that you've been in direct contact with Steve too, so.
Now is the CPACE going as well?
CPACE, they're skipping the RTA.
Oh, this
November is.
Oh, that's right. You don't need to you don't need to go to the board for.
You know, I'm an attorney and I still didn't
Okay.
understand, you know, I read it and I was like, okay, whatever. As long
If I could just.
as the county attorney said. good, go.
Zoning,
Yeah.
you have to have an architecture zoning, related actions. However, it's the county's practice to traditionally do an RTA first, followed by adoption. But, with the understanding that we need to move quickly and be agile, made the decision to move quickly and be agile.
Yeah.
So, where we can, there are other instances where we want to have that extra layer, RTA.
Sorry, Steve.
Tomorrow.
Yeah.
No worries at all. I appreciate that. And and I tried to send along some a summary of stuff and happy to answer any questions over email, and then looking forward to coordinating with Doug to meet the energy committee. So no worries at all. I know you all are busy. So thanks.
Thank you, Stephen.
Sorry,
Yeah.
we would probably have been able to do it, but this was, as you saw. And just, I should have said this before, Jenna sent a long email that we prepared to all of us about the changes in the electrical charges for EV, counties and possible tickets and fines if you park at an EV charger for too long. And anyway,
I mean, it actually all sounds pretty good.
yeah. So, yeah, if we hated it, we would have made time for you. That's the good thing.
Yeah.
Thank you all online.
Thank you all, and thank you all.
Thanks,
online
everyone.
and in the
Silence is accepted.
See you Wednesday.
Thanks all.